The title of my message today is Religion Has Damned More People Than It Has Ever Saved. Religion has damned more people than it has ever saved. What has caused most of the wars in the world? Religion. Religion has caused most of the wars. We had this last week, everybody knows that we had a bombing there at the Boston Marathon. And it was over religion. That's what it was about, over religion. One of them's still alive, and they're going to try to question him, I'm sure, trying to keep him alive. The two boys, they were Russian, you know. And I have been teaching on eschatology for the last several weeks, haven't I? Eschatology. And what does eschatology mean? The study of last things. The study of last things. Eschatology is very, very robust in false religion. Very robust in false religion. That's the main thing about it. These Russian boys were Islam, as you know. Islam is a very violent religion. It is a religion, but it is also rules. Islam is spreading all over the world. The Southern Baptist Convention, it is said, what the Southern Baptist Convention spends in 1 year on evangelism, the Islam world spends in 1 day. As you go over Bakersfield, I remember Ripley's Believe It or Not years and years ago. I mean, most of you aren't old enough to remember that. Some of you remember Ripley's Believe It or Not. Brother Connie, you remember Ripley's Believe It or Not? He had a deal on the show, and this guy got on there and he wrapped his head. They got this long piece of cloth and they wrapped his head because we had never seen in the Western world this rag on top of these people's heads that they have, the Muslims. But, and he did that on a program and showed how that they wrapped their head. Boy, now can you go any places that you don't see these people, these Muslims? Okay? Pretty hard to do. We have mosques all over Bakersfield, don't we? All over the place. Almost as many mosques as we do churches, and there are different denominations of Islam. Some are not as violent as others. We really must know that. Our new president has tried to appease the Muslim world. Some of them, well, you know, one of the guys was a Supreme Court justice that he swore in on a Quran instead of a Bible. And he said that America was not just a Christian nation, it was a Muslim nation also. Well, there are many religions here. It's a Jehovah's Witness nation. It is a Mormon nation. It's all kinds of nations. You know, there are a lot of people in this nation. But Islam is a violent religion. Judaism is a violent religion. Did you know that? Catholicism is a violent religion. Is it not? Yeah. Violence. Religion is a religion of violence. Violence. It's vile. They kill people. They hold the sword at people's throat. In the 14th chapter, we're going to see religion turned loose. Religion turned loose. Damnable religion turned loose. In the 14th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. In the Islamic world, let's go back there and pick on them a little bit. There aren't any Islam in here today? We'll just pick on them. They're not here, okay? In the Islamic world, an Islamic martyr, when he dies, you know what he does? Huh?
Oh, if he's a martyr?
According to the Islamic law, according to the Islamic religion, when he dies, immediately he gets married. The Muslim funerals are not funerals. A martyr's funeral is not a funeral. As a funeral, it is a wedding feast, because he's going to get 70 virgins. He's going to get married to 70 virgins. Not only that, but he becomes an intercessor for 70 of his family. He gets 70 of them. When he dies, his blood covers 70 of his people, his family, that he wants to take to heaven with him, to the beatific vision, to paradise. All right? We see that. Religion has damned more people than it has ever saved. Religion is violent. Now, true religion is different. What does religion mean? Religion. What? The act of binding back again. Re in the front means back again, and legere, and then I-O-N. Religion. Okay, religion. The act of binding back again. Thank you, Brother Mike. You get an A+ for today. But religion can bind you away from God. Bind you away from God. True religion. The first time in the Western world, over here in the West, what we call America, so to speak, the first time there was ever a religious experiment for freedom was in Rhode Island. Rhode Island. John Clark went for years and years and years and petitioned, and Roger Williams. Roger Williams wasn't quite as problem. They gave the, it ended up being on, Roger Williams got to be the head of this thing, but he really wasn't. John Clark was, Dr. John Clark. And they established the first religiously free colony in America, in Rhode Island. First place. Very seldom in the world has there ever been a freedom of religion. When the United States was founded, there wasn't religious freedom. Did you know that in this country? They had to have a Bill of Rights tacked on to the Constitution to give you freedom of religion. Okay? Freedom of religion. Not only that, freedom to bear arms. They weren't quite so sure that they could trust the country, so they wanted to be able to bear arms against it and have arms to fight for them. That's the Second Amendment. Okay? Well, let's go back today and study a little bit of religion and see what religion has done to the world. Okay? True religion doesn't use a sword or a gun to get you converted. True religion doesn't use force to force you to believe what they believe. The Muslims, I can guarantee you one thing, you can curse Jesus' name, you can curse the name of God, you can do anything you want to, but if you curse Allah or curse Muhammad, you're going to die. Do you know that? You're going to die. No Christian is going to go kill somebody for using God's name in vain. They may tell you they don't like it, but they're not going to kill you. You go in any Islamic world and you cannot pray in the name of Jesus. Did you know that? You cannot head down and pray and have a prayer at your lunch or your dinner or your breakfast. You're not given that right. But they want it here. They want it here. Okay? They want it in England. Now they've got Islamic courts in England. If you're Islamic, you get... That's coming next here. Okay? Yeah. It's coming next here. All right? But what is this telling us? That the end is near. I was playing a tape this morning by a former Islamic man telling the history of his religion just before the class. We're going to go to the 14th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. Now the feast of the Passover of unleavened bread was 2 days off, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to seize him by stealth and kill him. Murderous. Now these were very religious people. Very religious people, okay? For they were saying, not during the festival, lest there be a riot of the people. Let's don't profane our religious festival. We'll commit murder, and we'll lie, and we'll cheat, and we'll steal, and we'll murder. But just don't mess up our religion. Let's don't get blood on our religious ceremonies. Okay? Now, I'm going to go back in history, and now some of you have heard me read this before. Mike, I think you probably have. Some of you have, but many of you haven't that are new students. This is from the Arco volume. This is just like reading right out of the Bible. This is Pontius Pilate's letter, and it is addressed to Tiberius Caesar, Emperor of Rome, noble sovereign greeting. The events of the last few days in my province have been of such character that I will give the details in full as they occurred, as I should not be surprised if, in the course of time, they may change the destiny of our nation. For it seems of late that the gods have ceased to be propitious. Now I'm going to jump in different places. He's talking here of the Jewish people, the Jewish religious leaders. He said, I really believe that they betrayed their own mother to gain office and a luxurious living. It seems to me that the conquered city of Jerusalem is the most difficult to govern of all of our turbulent people. So turbulent are the people that I live in momentary dread of an insurrection. I have not soldiers sufficient to suppress it. I have only 1 centurion and 100 men at my command, and I requested reinforcement from the prefect of Syria, who informed me that he had scarcely troops sufficient to defend his own province. Now he goes on to say when he first met Jesus. And this is the only description of Jesus in history that we have. Did you know that? Literally physical description of Jesus in history. He said there was a young man, it was said, had appeared in Galilee preaching with a noble unction, a new law in the name of God that it's in him. He said his name was Jesus of Nazareth, spoke rather as a friend of the Romans than of the Jews. One day in passing by the pool of Siloam, where there was a great concurrence of people, I observed in the midst of the group a young man who was leaning against a tree, calmly addressing the multitude. I was told it was Jesus. This I could easily suspect, so great was the difference between him and those listening to him. His golden-colored hair and beard gave his appearance a celestial aspect. He appeared to be about 30 years of age. Never have I seen a sweeter and more serene countenance. What a contrast between him and his hearers with their black beards and tawny complexions. I was unwilling to interrupt him, so I left my servant Manlius, who related to me the words that Jesus had spoke at Siloam. He said, it was on account of the wisdom of the sayings that I granted so much liberty to this Nazarene. Why is he called a Nazarene? Because he lived in Nazareth. For it was my power to have him arrested and exiled to Pontius. But that would have been contrary to the justice that has always characterized the Roman government. I extended to him my protection unknown perhaps to himself. He was at liberty to act and speak and assemble and address the people. By the way, he did that, didn't he? Pontius Pilate could have stopped Jesus any time, couldn't he? But he did not. That's a historical fact. To assemble, to address the people, and to choose disciples, unrestrained by any praetorian mandate. Should it ever happen, may the gods avert the omen, should it ever happen, I say that the religion of our forefathers be supplanted by the religion of Jesus, it will be on this noble toleration that Rome shall owe her premature death, while I, miserable wretch, will have been the instrument of the Jews, called the province we call destiny. He said that Jesus kept on preaching, and that the Jews, with religious terrorism, who were the Sicarii? There were terrorists of the day. Those are the ones we know that some of them migrated to Sicily and became the Black Hand, the Mafia, the Mafiosa. We have the Jewish Mafia as well as the Italiano Mafia. They carried their long daggers that they stuck in the pit of his stomach, twisted into the heart, and walked off and left him. That's what they were doing at Masada. Being too weak to suppress an insurrection, I resolved on adopting a measure that promised to restore the tranquility of the city without subjecting the praetorium to humiliating concession. I wrote to Jesus. He said, I wrote to Jesus. And I requested an interview with him. You know that in my veins flows the Spanish mixed with Roman blood, as incapable of fear as it is weak of motion. Audie Murphy was one of the greatest soldiers and heroes of the history of the world. Do you know that? I don't know if there's ever a greater one. And he starred in a movie called Red Badge of Courage. And they wanted him to star as a coward to begin with. He said, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm not a coward. They starred in that movie, and boy, he did a good job. But he became a hero in the movie. Pontius Pilate says here, I am incapable. Audie Murphy said, I am incapable of running from a fight. But they had him run in the movie. Then he came back, and then he charged out in front of everybody else. He said, I am of Spanish mixed with Roman blood, as incapable of fear as of weak emotion. When the Nazarene made his appearance, I was walking in my basilica. My feet seemed fastened with an iron hand to the marble pavement. I trembled every limb, as does a guilty culprit, though the Nazarene was as calm and as innocence itself. When he came up to me, he stopped, and by a signal he seemed to say, I'm here. Though he spoke not a word, for some time I contemplated with admiration and awe this ordinary type of man, a type of man unknown to our numerous painters who have given form and figure to all the gods and heroes. Remember how all the Romans, how they carved the gods and goddesses? There was nothing about him that was repelling in its character, yet I felt too awed and tremulous to approach him. Jesus, said I unto him, at last my tongue faltered, Jesus of Nazareth, for the last 3 years I've granted you ample freedom of speech, nor do I regret it. Your words are those of a sage. I know not whether you have read Socrates or Plato, but this I know, there is in your discourses a majestic simplicity that elevates you far above those philosophers. The emperor is informed of it, and I, his humble representative in this country, am glad, having allowed you the liberty of which you are so worthy. However, I must not conceal from you that your discourses has raised up against you powerful and inveterate enemies. Nor is this surprising. Socrates had his enemies, and he fell victim to their hatred. Yours is doubly incensed against you, on account of your discourses being so severe upon their conduct. Think about the conduct that Jesus, how he talked about the Jews. How did he talk about it? You snakes in the grass. He said, against me on account of the liberty I have afforded you. He said, I'm in trouble now, Buster, because of the liberty I gave to you. They even accuse me of indirectly being leagued with you for the purpose of depriving the Hebrews of their civil power which Rome has left them. My request, I do not say my order is, my request, that you be more circumspect and moderate in your discourses in the future. Calm it down, tone it down just a little bit, and more considerate of them, lest you arouse the pride of their enemies, and they rise against you the stupid populace and compelled me to employ the instruments of the law. And the Nazarene calmly said, Prince of this earth, your words proceed not from true wisdom. Say to the torrent to stop in the midst of a mountain gorge. It will uproot the trees of the valley. The torrent will answer you that it obeys the laws of nature and the Creator. God alone knows whether the flow of the waters of the torrent. Verily I say unto you, before the rose of Sharon blossoms, the blood of the just shall be spilled. Your blood shall not be spilled, said I with deep emotion. You are more precious in my estimation on account of your wisdom than all the turbulent and proud Pharisees who abuse the freedom granted to them by the Romans. They conspire against Caesar and convert his bounty into fear, impressing and unlearned that Caesar is a tyrant and seeks their ruin, and did they not? Is this not the true? Is this not Herod's wife, Herodias, sought to Sicarii to kill John the Baptist, and Herod put him in jail for protected custody against the Sicarii. Insolent wretches, he says. They are not aware that the wolf of the Tiber sometimes clothes himself in the skin of the sheep to accomplish his wicked design. I will protect you against them. My praetorium will be your protectorate. My praetorium shall be an asylum, sacred both day and night. And Jesus carelessly shook his head and said with a grave and divine smile, when that day shall have come, there will be no asylums for the Son of Man, neither in this earth or under the earth. The asylum of the just is there, pointing to the heavens. That which is written in the books of the prophets must be accomplished. Young man, I answered mildly, you oblige me to convert your request into an order? The safety of the province which has been confided my care requires it. You must observe more moderation in your discourses. Do not infringe my order. You know the consequences. My happiness attend you. Farewell. Prince of the earth, replied Jesus, I come not to bring war into the world, but peace and love and charity. I was born the same day in which Augustus Caesar gave peace to the Roman world. Persecutions proceed not from me. I expect it from the others, and I will meet it in obedience to the will of my Father, who has shown me the way. Restrain, therefore, your worldly prudence. It is not in your power to arrest the victim at the foot of the tabernacle of expiation. So saying, he disappeared like a bright shadow behind the curtains of the basilica, to my great relief, for I felt a heavy burden on me, which I could not relieve myself while in his presence. To Herod, who then reigned in Galilee, the enemies of Jesus addressed themselves to wreak their vengeance on the Nazarene. This is all what we're about to read about. I wanted you to give you an extra biblical account of this also. The world, the agnostic and the atheistic world, said there is no other sources tell us about Jesus' life. The Muslims in the world today say Jesus never lived and died on the cross. He didn't do it. They say that David never was king of Israel. They say Solomon was never king of Israel. They said the temple of Solomon was never built on that mountain where the Mosque of Omar is. Did you know that?
What about Abraham?
Yeah. Abraham was their father.
Right.
Yeah. And the Islamic world says this, that the Bible was perverted by the Jews and then by the Christians. And you might say, where is it perverted? They said, where it says that Abraham offered Isaac, he actually offered Ishmael instead. That Ishmael was his firstborn son, not Isaac. And that in the New Testament, where it says about Jesus performing the miracles, he did perform some miracles, yes. But he never said that he was God the Son. Never. And so they will not read, and they do not look as valid the gospel according to John, because the gospel according to John tells us that Jehovah became flesh. They said they won't to look at any of the New Testament books that tell that Jesus is God. And the ones that plainly do that is the Gospel of John. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John and the book of Revelation tell us that Jesus plainly is Jehovah in flesh. And the book of Colossians tells us that he is that person. And the book of Hebrews. So we have to take those out. And we don't look at those books. Because they are too plainly. We know. They say that we accept Jesus as a prophet only. And that he did not die. He did not die. He did not die for anybody's sins. We all are responsible for our own sins. That's what they say. Now to Herod, who then reigned in Galilee, the enemies of Jesus addressed themselves to reap the vengeance of the Nazarene. Had Herod consulted his own inclinations, he would have ordered Jesus immediately put to death. But though proud of his royal dignity, yet he hesitated to commit an act that might lessen his influence with the Senate, or like me, was afraid of Jesus. But it would never do for the Roman officer to be scared by Jew. Previously to this, Herod called on me at the Praetorium, rising to take leave after some trifling conversation, asked me what was my opinion concerning the Nazarene. I replied that Jesus appeared to me to be one of those great philosophers that great nations sometimes produce, that his doctrines were by no means sacrilegious, and that the intentions of the Roman were to leave him freedom of speech, which was justified by his actions. Herod smiled maliciously and saluted me with an ironic respect and departed. The great feast of the Jews was approaching, and intention was being to avail themselves of a popular exaltation, which was always manifests itself at the solemnities of the Passover. See, the Passover hadn't happened yet. Remember, when we read the book here of Mark, where it talks about the Passover, Jesus was crucified before the Passover, not during the Passover, before it. All right, over and over again. The city was overflowing with tumultuous populace clamoring for the death of the Nazarene. My emissaries informed me that the treasurer of the temple had been employed in bribing people. The danger was pressing. The Roman centurion had been insulted. I wrote to prefect of Cetera for 100 foot soldiers, as many cavalry, and he declined. I saw myself with a handful of veterans in the midst of a rebellious city, too weak to suppress an uprising and having no choice left but to tolerate it. They had seized upon Jesus. And the seditious rabble, although they had nothing to fear from the Praetorium, believing as their leaders had told them that I winked at the sedition, continued vociferating, crucifying, crucifying. Three powerful parties had combined finally at the time against Jesus: the Herodians, the Sadducees, whose seditious conduct seemed to have proceeded from the double motives. They hated the Nazarene and were impatient of the Roman yoke. They never forgave me for having entered the holy city with banners which bore the image of the Roman emperor, although in this instance I had committed a fatal error, yet their sacrilege did not appear less heinous in their eye. Another grievance also rankled in their bosoms. I had proposed to employ part of the treasure of the temple in erecting edifices for public use. My proposal was scorned. The Pharisees were the avowed enemies of Jesus. They cared not for the government. They bore with bitterness the severe reprimands of the Nazarene for 3 years, had been continually giving them wherever he went. Timid and too weak to act by themselves, they embraced the quarrels of the Herodians and the Sadducees. Besides these three parties, I had contended against the reckless and proliferate populace, always ready to join the sedition and profit by the disorder of the confusion that resulted therefrom. Jesus was dragged before the high priest, condemned to death. It was then that the high priest Caiaphas performed a devisatory act of submission. He sent his prisoner to me to conform to the condemnation and secure his execution. I answered him that Jesus was a Galilean, and the affair came under Herod's jurisdiction, and ordered him to take him there. The wily tetrarch professed humility and protested his deference to the lieutenant of Caesar, and he committed the fate of the man to my hands. So my palace assumed the aspect of a besieged citadel. I was besieged, he said. Every moment increased the number of the malcontents. Jerusalem was inundated with crowds from the mountains of Nazareth. All Judea seemed to be pouring into the city. I had taken a wife from among the Gauls and pretended to see into futurity. Weeping and throwing herself at my feet, she said to me, "Beware, beware, and touch not that man, for he is holy." Last night I saw him in a vision. He was walking on the waters. He was flying on the wings of the wind. He spoke to the tempest and the fishes of the lake, and all were obedient to him. And behold, the torrent on Mount Kidron flows with blood. The statues of Caesar are filled with genocide. The columns of the Interium have given way, and the sun is veiled in mourning like the vestibule of a tomb. All Pilate, evil awaits you. If you will not listen to the vows of your wife, dread the curse of the Roman Senate, dread the frowns of Caesar. By this time the marble stair groaned under the weight of the multitude. I proceeded to the halls of justice, followed by my guard, and asked the people in a severe tone what they demanded. And they said, "The death of the Nazarene," was the reply. "For what crime?" I said. "He has blasphemed. He has prophesied the ruin of the temple. He calls himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews." Roman justice said, "I punishes not such offenses with death." And they kept on crying, "Crucify him, crucify him," cried the relentless rabble. The vociferous of the infuriated mob shook the palace to its foundations. There was but one who appeared to be calm in the midst of the vast multitude. It was the Nazarene. After many fruitless attempts to protect him from the fury of his merciless persecutors, I adopted a measure which at the moment appeared to me to be the only one to save his life. I proposed, as it was their custom, to deliver a prisoner on such occasions to release Jesus and let him go free, that he might be the scapegoat, as they called it. But they said Jesus must be crucified. I then spoke to them of inconsistency of their course as being incompatible with their own law, showing that no criminal judge could pass sentence on a criminal unless he had fasted one whole day. He said he's talking about their laws. He's quoting the Jewish laws. He knows Hebrew. Pontius Pilate is a brilliant man. He wrote Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, in Latin and in Greek and in Hebrew himself with his own hand. He had fasted one whole day, and the sentence must be the consent of the Sanhedrin and the signature of the president of the court, that no criminal could be executed on the same day that his sentence was fixed. And the next day, on the day of his execution, the Sanhedrin was required to review the whole proceeding all over again, according to their law. And a man was stationed at the door of the court with a flag, and another a short way off on horseback, to cry in the name of the criminal and his crime and the names of his witnesses, and to know if anyone could testify in his favor. And the prisoner on his way to execution had the right to turn back 3 times to plead any new thing in his favor. This is all according to Jewish law now. I urged all these pleas, hoping that it might awe them into subjection, but they still cried, "Crucify him, crucify him." I then ordered Jesus to be scourged, hoping that this might satisfy them. He had him beat almost to death. He probably wouldn't have lived through the beating. But it only increased their fury. I then called for a basin, and I washed my hands in the presence of the clamorous multitude, thus testifying that my judgment, Jesus of Nazareth, had done nothing deserving death, but in vain It was his life these wretches thirsted for. Often in our civil commotions I have witnessed a furious anger of a multitude, but nothing could be compared to what I witnessed on this occasion. It might have been truly said that all the phantoms of the infernal regions had been assembled at Jerusalem. All of the demons of hell were turned loose upon me that day. The crowd appeared not to walk, but to be borne off and whirled into a vortex, rolling along in living waves from the portals of the Praetorium even unto the Mount of Zion, howling screams, shrieks, vociferations such as were never heard in the sedations of Panoria or the tumults of the Forum. By degrees the day darkened like a winter's twilight, such as has been in the death of the great Julius Caesar. It was likewise the Ides of March. I, the continued governor of a rebellious province, was leaning against the column of my basilica, contemplating athwart the dreary gloom that finds a Tartarus dragging to execution the innocent Nazarene. The dreary gloom, these fiends of Tartarus. Tartarus is the bottomless pit. Dragging to execution to enter the innocent Nazarene. All around me was deserted. Jerusalem had vomited forth her indwellers through the funeral gate that leads to Germanica. An air of desolation and sadness enveloped me. My guards had joined the cavalry and the centurion with a display of power and was endeavoring to keep order. I was left alone, my breaking heart admonishing me that what was passing at the moment appertained rather to the history of the gods than that of man. A loud clamor was heard proceeding from Golgotha, which borne on the winds seemed to announce an agony such as was never heard by mortal ears. Dark clouds lowered over the pinnacle of the temple, setting over the city, covered it with a veil. So dreadful were the signs that men saw both in the heavens and on the earth that Dionysius, the Areopagite, is reported to have exclaimed, either the author of nature is suffering from the universe, or the universe is falling apart. While all these appealing scenes of nature were transpiring, there was a dreadful earthquake in Lower Egypt which filled everybody with fear and scared the superstitious Jews almost to death. It is said Belshazzar, an aged and learned Jew of Antioch, was found dead after the excitement was over. Whether he died from the alarm or grief is not known. He was a strong friend of the Nazarene. Now let's go back and look in the Bible real quick. We saw that from history. We saw that from official letter from Pontius Pilate to Tiberius Caesar. And while he was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper, reclining at table, came a woman with an alabaster vial of costly perfume, pure nard, and she broke the vial and poured it on his head. But some were indignant, remarking to one another, for what purpose has this perfume been wasted? For this perfume might have been sold for 300 denarii. That is almost a year's wages. Probably if you take the days off and the Sabbaths off, that's a whole year's wages. Okay? The money was given to the poor, and they were scolding her. But Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you bother her? She has done a good deed to me. For the poor you always have with you, and wherever you wish, you can do them good. But you do not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. Verse number 9, and truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached in the world, that also which this woman has done shall be spoken of in her memory. Now this was done twice to Jesus. You know that, don't you? There were two different ones. One of them was Mary Magdalene. And two times it was done. Okay? You can look in other parts of the Synoptic Gospels. Verse number 10. And Judas Iscariot. Judas means what? Judas. Yehuda. Judas. It's Judah. That's what his name is, Judah, Yehuda. It means praise Jehovah. That's what his name means. And Iscariot. Ishkarios. Man from Karios. All right, you Hebrew scholars. Who was one of the 12 was sent off to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And they were glad when they heard this and promised to give him money. And they kept on seeking how to betray him at an opportune time. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed, the disciples came to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare to eat the Passover?" And he sent 2 of the disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you with a pitcher of water, and follow him. And wherever they say to the owner of the house, the teacher says, 'Where is my guest room, which I may eat the Passover with my disciples?'" Now remember, he ate the Passover one day early. All right? "And he himself will show you a large upper room furnished and ready and prepared for us there." And the disciples went out and came to the city. And by the way, who do they say owned this upper room? Historically. Most Bible scholars, who owned this upper room? John the Apostle. All right? John was young at this time. And the disciples went out and came to the city and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. And when evening had come with the 12, he was reclining, laying up the table and eating. Jesus said to them, "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." And they began. They kept on being grieved, saying to one another, "Is it I? Surely it isn't me." And he said to them, "It is one of the 12, whom dips with me his hand in the bowl. For the Son of Man is to go, just as is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man to have not been born." And while they were eating, he took some bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, and he gave it to them, and said, "Take it, this is my body." And this is when he institutes the Lord's Supper. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is the blood of the covenant, which is to be shed on behalf of many. And truly I say to you, I shall never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it with you new into the kingdom of God." Every time that they took the Passover, they would take Elijah's cup and they would take Elijah's bread at the end of it, and they would say, "Next year in Jerusalem." But he said here, "No more. No more. I will not take and I will not eat with you again until we come in the kingdom." That's when the Lord marries his bride. Now, in the Muslim religion, they don't believe in blood atonement for their sins from a intercessor, Jesus. But they believe the blood atonement comes from the martyrs. He has instantly goes into the beatific vision or paradise, and he has 70 virgins waiting for him, and he gets to pick 70 people in his family, which he can take with him into paradise. His blood covers 70 of their sins. They have a blood atonement, all right, but it's martyr's blood. 26. After singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away, because it is written, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go on before you to Galilee." And Peter said to him, "Even though all may fall away, yet I will not." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you, that you yourself this very night, before the cock crows twice, shall deny me 3 times. He told time. Religion has damned more people than it has ever saved. Remember that. 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Just like it says on that clock. The rooster crows every 3 hours. Between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. before the cock crows once, twice, you'll deny me 3 times. He told him exactly what was going to happen. Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter kept on saying, insistingly, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And they were all saying the same thing. In verse number 32, and they came to the place called Gethsemane. What does that mean? Gethsemane. Remember what that means? That's the olive press. All right. And they came to the place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, "Sit here until I prayed." And he took with them Peter, James, and John, and they kept on being very distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch." Jesus was suffering right there. Jesus was feeling the pain of the cross right there. And all of your sins and my sins upon him. He was feeling the pain, the weight of our sins upon him right there. And he went a little bit beyond. And he fell to the ground and began, and actually it says he kept on praying that if it was possible the hour might pass from him. He's human, wasn't he? The human Jesus was hurting. Audie Murphy said before he went into battle, every time it felt like the cold hands of death went right into his bowels and started twisting him. He said it felt like he was disemboweling a chicken when he used to kill the chickens at home. Once he got into the battle, that fear would go away, but he felt the cold hands of death just reach into his bowels and twist. That's what Jesus was feeling right here. He, in his human body that he had taken on to redeem us from our sins, was suffering. And they were saying, "Father, Father, all things are possible for thee. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what thou wilt." And he came and found them sleeping and said to them, "Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not have watched for me for 1 hour? Keep watching and praying, that you may not come into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed, saying the same thing. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of religious sinners." Organized religion. Religion that damns. "Arise and let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand." And immediately while they were still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came up and accompanied with a multitude of swords and clubs, and the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And now he who was betraying him had given them a signal, saying, "Whomever I shall keep on kissing, he is the one. Seize him and lead him away under guard." And after coming, he immediately went up to him and said, "Rabbi," which means Dr. Jesus. And he kept on kissing him fervently. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But a certain one of those who stood by with a sword drew the sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. By the way, it doesn't mention his name here because this book was written before Peter was killed. It never named Peter until later, after Peter had died, because Peter would have been arrested. And Jesus answered and said to them, "Have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a robber, a criminal? Every day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me, but this has happened that the scripture might be fulfilled." They all have left him and fled. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen sheet over his naked body, and they seized him. This is the Apostle John, by the way. This is what they say. or Mark. John Mark, or the Apostle John. And he left the linen sheet behind and escaped naked. And they led Jesus away to the high priest, and all the chief priests and elders and scribes gathered together. And Peter had followed him from a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest, and was sitting with the officers and warming himself by at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council kept trying to obtain testimony against Jesus to put him to death, and they were finding none. For many were giving false testimony against them. These were all paid perjurers. And yet the testimony was not consistent. And some stood up and kept on giving false testimony against him. "We heard him say, I will destroy this temple and made with hands, and 3 days I will build another made without hands. And not even in this respect was their testimony consistent. And the high priest arose and came forward and questioned Jesus, saying, Do you make no answer to what these men are testifying against you? And he kept silent and made no answer. And again the high priest kept on questioning him and saying to him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus said, I am. And you see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with clouds of heaven. And tearing his clothes, the high priest says, What further need do we have of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. How does it seem to you? And they all condemned him to deserving death. And some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, and to beat him with their fists, and to say to him, Prophesy. The officers received him with slaps in his face. And Peter was below in the courtyard. One of the servant girls of the high priest came. And seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, You too were with Jesus the Nazarene. But he denied, saying that I never know or understand what you are talking about. And he went out into the porch. And the maid saw him and began once more to say to the bystanders, This is one of them. But again he denied him. This is the 3 times that he would deny him. And after a little while the bystanders were again saying to Peter, Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean too. And he kept on cursing and swearing, I do not know the fellow you're talking about. And immediately the cock crowed the 2nd time. And Peter remembered how Jesus made the remark to him, Before the cock crows twice, you'll deny me 3 times. And he began to weep. Thank you very much. I hope that this tied it all together. I didn't know what I was going to get time. I rushed. All right. Thank you very much. Brett, are you the only one left here? Or you're the one that's going to come up here?
I don't have any announcements.
Do we have anything? I can do it. Yeah. All right. Do you have any prayer requests?
I want to ask a question now.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time.
Just real quick. John, the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptics. John is kind of stands alone by himself.
And John 1 and the Revelator, they're different people.
They're the same people.
Okay.
Okay, the book of Revelation, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the Gospel according to John are all by the same writer, and all of them, he shows every one of them, he calls Jesus Jehovah. In the beginning was the Word. That word there means Jehovah, and the Word kept on being a part of God, or inseparable part of God, because he kept on being God. John 1:14 is the fulfillment of it, and the Jehovah flesh he became. Okay, and in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John he says the same thing, and in the book of Revelation he says the same thing. That's why the Muslims will not accept that book.
Well, he's also not a scholar.
Or those
right?
books. What?
He's inspired, but he's not a scholar, right? It's not a scholarly written book.
What?
John's.
John is a very beautiful book. I'll be teaching that book pretty soon. The book of Revelation has got so much Hebraism in it that it is absolutely a grammatical mess. But it's because of the Hebraism in the book of Revelation. And John uses Hebraisms in the Gospel of John also. In beginning was the Word. In the beginning kept on being the Jehovah. That's a Hebraism. Okay? All right. Do you have any prayer requests? Pray for Connie.
Yeah, Connie's on
He just
and we need travel mercies.
All right, and for Rex, and he's in Colorado. All right. What else? Pray for my mother, please. Let me